Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormals. I love talking about the humanoid cases. I find them endlessly interesting. There's so many of them, and I think they have a lot to teach us about what is going on with extraterrestrial contact on this planet. The title of today's episode is called 10 Truly Strange Humanoid Encounters. I've chosen 10 cases that are not well known. I'd be surprised if you've heard of these, but I think these cases are important because each of them has unique elements, really strange features to them that are either very rare or completely unique. Whether we're talking about the type of extraterrestrial that's being seen, or the clothes they're wearing, or the way they behave, or how people react to them. All of these cases definitely have something to teach us about the nature of extraterrestrial contact. These cases cover 8 decades, reaching all the way back to 1954 up to 2022. So we'll go on a journey through time and of course across the world. These 10 cases come from far-flung places on this planet. There are 3 from outside of the United States, including Canada, Portugal, and Chile, and 7 from within the United States, including California, Kentucky, Michigan, North Carolina, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So I hope you find this episode interesting. These humanoid cases are just so fascinating to me. So let's just get started with the first one. First case I'd like to talk about today, I call 8-foot-tall aliens. This one occurred on August 7, 1954 in Saint Bernard de Lacolle. This is in Canada. This case is super interesting because it does have quite a few witnesses. There are also landing traces. It's very well documented, and the type of ETs described is very unusual. This case was investigated by researcher Adolf Dittmar. It did enjoy some minor publicity. It occurred in the small town of Saint Bernard de Lacolle. This is outside of Hamilton, Quebec, Canada. This is a small farming community, but it does contain an animal reserve, which could in some way be connected to this encounter. It occurred on the night of August 7, 1954. The Coupal family, consisting of Philippe and Irene Coupal, and their 8 sons, experienced an extraordinary encounter with a UFO. It began in the evening after they ate supper when 2 of their sons, Gabriel and Henri, aged 13 and 11, rode off on the family's horse out into the fields near their homes. They dismounted and began to pick some peas out of their fields. And suddenly this is when they heard a sound, quote, like bees. Gabriel looked up and saw a glowing, multicolored, 9-foot wide spherical-shaped craft which was descending towards the ground not too far away from their barn, and about 150 feet away from them. Now this object stopped and hovered just a short distance above the ground and quickly turned black, at which point it sent down a ladder-like shaft towards the ground. One of the boys described it as a, quote, a black cable with a square thing hanging, making like a ladder. An opening immediately appeared and a very tall man emerged. Both boys at this point became badly frightened. In fact, Gabriel, the older brother, grabbed his younger brother Henri, and they jumped up on their horse and both ran towards the house. Henri looked back and shouted out, "I see a big man coming after us." So this craft moved to a different location and actually landed near the barn, and 2 other very tall figures could now be seen. In an interview about 11 days after the event, the boys described these beings, these men, as about 7 to 8 feet tall, wearing skin-tight black rubber suits. They said they were well built, and one carried a device in his hand, which the boys described as looking like a machine gun. The men looked human but had, quote, great big round eyes and black hair that was, quote, not combed like the men around here, cut differently, and it wasn't very long. The 2 brothers dashed inside their home after seeing these figures and informed their family, who rushed out to come see. None of them could see any humanoids at this point, they were gone. But they did all see this object hovering in the sky, which now appeared as a glowing orange sphere. And it remained there for more than an hour, actually moving around to different locations on their property and in the neighboring area, touching down briefly on the ground several times. And there were other witnesses. In addition to the Kupal family, several other people saw this craft, including Charles Edgar Petch, you can see him here, and Mr. and Mrs. Douglas Laurie, whose home the object hovered over for just a brief amount of time. Later, Charles Petch examined one of the sites where this object had touched down, and he found what looked like skid marks on the ground and a 30 to 50 foot wide circle of flattened grass. So that's an amazing encounter, and it's not the only one in this area. 9 years later, in the summer of 1963, nearby Hemmingford would experience another dramatic sighting when around 10 p.m. one evening, a married couple, the wife's younger sister and brother, and a couple of friends were all sitting on the porch of their home. And as the witness says, we heard a sizzling sound. Up over the trees, we saw a huge round object about the size of a bungalow flying from south to north. It was more pear-shaped than round, about 200 feet above the poplar trees, coasting along, barely moving in fact. It had about 12 or 15 windows glowing with bluish light. The windows were about 1.5 feet square with sharp corners, about 6 inches apart, all in a line around the middle. The outside was a grayish flat silver, not shiny. It coasted past the house, sailing over the bush, picked up a little speed, and we watched it for about 5 minutes total until we couldn't see it anymore. We were all amazed. We were sure we had seen a flying saucer, but we figured no one would believe us. I didn't tell anyone about it. This was a small town. I didn't want to be laughed at. Now, 2 months later, the witness did hear a couple at the local restaurant talking about a UFO they had recently seen and described it in the exact same details. So it was clear to her that someone else had seen this thing. Now, she didn't say anything to them, but she didn't disbelieve them either, because she says her own encounter convinced her of the reality of UFOs. And she says, I still have a very clear memory of it. Now I drive trucks at night, and I always look up. You don't forget a sighting like that. You watch for another one. If I'm outside, I'm always looking up. What a fascinating case. I think there has to be a reason that UFO, those ETs, were visiting that particular area. Perhaps it was because there's a nature reserve there. We do know that ETs do have an interest in preserving the biological life on this planet, so perhaps that's the reason. It's very hard to say, but the behavior of the UFO floating there for 1.5, 2 hours, touching down in various places in this field, really makes me wonder what they're up to. A really amazing case. Now let's move to the next one, which I call That UFO Was Looking for Me. This occurred one evening in November of 1966 in Medford, Oregon. Actually occurred over a period of time. We do see a number of cases where a UFO shows up, and this is followed by a much closer encounter. That's exactly what happened in this case. I found this case particularly interesting because of how the witness described what the ET was wearing. So I think you'll find it an amazing case. This case does involve multiple witnesses, but the primary witness reported his case on the condition of anonymity, so I'll use the pseudonym Eric. He was 8 years old at the time of his encounter and lived with his family in a desolate, mountainous, forested area outside of Medford, Oregon. One evening in November 1966, his mother and their landlord all noticed strange lights in the sky. And as Eric says, they were all different colors of the spectrum, and danced, revolved, zigzagged, climbed, and descended. The show went on for an hour until they just got tired of looking at it. Nobody at the time knew anything about UFOs and just thought they were helicopters. So it was the very next night that Eric's family had a big party. There was a band playing live music at their house, and around 11 p.m., Eric's father asked him to go outside and retrieve his cigarettes, which he had left on the side yard picnic table. It was a dark night, so Eric grabbed a flashlight and headed out and into one of the strangest experiences in his life. And I'll just let Eric describe it in his own words as he says, "All of a sudden, I noticed a brilliant blue sparkling at the base of our tree. I slowly walked up to the tree, and a 3-foot tall being was standing there. The being had a white skin mask over his entire head. It was tight-fitting, like a lady's nylon stocking. There was no nose, mouth, or ears, and the being was wearing wraparound sunglasses. They were slightly farther apart than our sunglasses. The blue sparkling that attracted my attention was the coat that the being was wearing. It was a blue sequin jacket with a high collar, and the jacket came down to his knees. His blue jacket radiated blue sparkling action even in the dead of night. He was wearing gray dress pants with a crease down the front and cuffs at the bottom resting on top of black boots. He was also wearing black gauntlet gloves. His arms seemed to be very long. They went down to his knees. He stood motionless in front of the tree, trying to camouflage himself. I got scared, dropped my flashlight, and ran back to the house." Now, any thoughts that this being might be a miniature human wearing odd clothes were dispelled by what happened next. As Eric says, "I spun around to go get the flashlight. I ran up to the flashlight, looking up at the being, hoping he wouldn't harm me, grabbed it, and fled with terror. As I did so, the being communicated with me through ESP and said, 'Please don't be afraid,' in the sweetest way that anyone has ever spoken to me. When he said this, I felt a pull or tug on my forehead forcing me back, but I was so terrified that he couldn't control me. I went back inside and told my father that I saw a monster and couldn't get his cigarettes." Now, Eric's father did not believe him and ordered Eric to go back outside and get the cigarettes. So Eric, terrified, ran as fast as he could to the picnic table and scooped up the cigarettes. He quickly glanced at the tree where he had seen this figure and the surrounding area, but this little 3-foot tall being was gone. Now, as Eric says, and I quote, "This story gets even more strange. I buried this incident in the back of my mind and pretty much forgot about it, until, in 1971, I happened to see a book on UFOs in my junior high school library. I thought to myself, what is this? I started reading it, and to my shock and horror, it described what I saw years earlier. I became a UFO fanatic, reading everything I could find on the subject. I would spend hours every night watching the stars, wishing that I could see them again. I even started dreaming about aliens and their flying saucers." So this went on for some time, and then, as Eric says, one night it happened. Says Eric, "An orange glowing dome-shaped UFO was 400 yards away from me, hovering 100 feet above the ground in a subdivision, waving a bright spotlight down on the ground searching for someone. A woman in the area pulled over and got out of her car and slammed the door. As soon as she slammed the door, the UFO took silently off diagonally, leaving a fluorescent blue vapor form underneath the UFO. A white smoke ring came out from under it simultaneously, making a sonic boom. Then the UFO righted itself, then went through a spectrum of colors, then simply disappeared. 1 full second later, the UFO reappeared 2 miles away. It stayed there for 2 seconds, then wobbled off and disappeared in 2 seconds over a mountain range 20 miles away. Without a doubt in my mind, that UFO was looking for me." I would love to follow up with the witness on this case because I suspect he's probably had further encounters. When someone has a humanoid encounter, it's rarely a one-off. Sometimes it is, but it's clearly not in this case. And this case does show the pattern of a person being profoundly affected. Really, it changes their whole world view. It's a fascinating case on many levels. And here's another one, which I found particularly interesting. I call this one, "It Was Not a Monster." This one occurred one evening in January of 1967 in Riachuelo, Chile. I like this case because the witness is a professional. He's a trained observer. He describes his encounter very clearly. Also, this case is not well known. In some respects, it's a fairly typical account of a UFO landing and a humanoid being seen. But again, the humanoid is quite unusual, and this witness was affected very profoundly. I always wonder when these craft land and ETs come out, what exactly they're doing. Is this a display? Is this intentional? Is this designed to contact the witness in particular? This case raises these kinds of questions. This case was first published in the Santiago, Chile newspaper La Tercera, and it was later picked up by the Argentinian newspaper La Crónica, and also appeared in Lumière dans la Nuit and in the Flying Saucer Review. The witness is Mr. C. He's anonymous. He's a professional engineer. He requested anonymity because, as he says, to avoid complications of being considered mentally disturbed. It was in January of 1967 that he was on vacation and staying with a relative at the small town of Riachuelo, Chile. He enjoyed taking frequent walks in the forests surrounding the town, and late one afternoon, and after walking for some time, he sat down on a fallen tree log to take a quick rest. And as Mr. C says, my attention was suddenly drawn by a powerful ray of light. I felt a dazzling sensation, and for a few moments I had those white dots that one sees when one's eyes look at the sun. I thought it was a camera flash, but this sort of purplish luminosity remained in my retina. Afterwards, just as I was preparing to leave, I noticed a strange brightness in a nearby place. I thought that people on vacation in those places had lit a campfire, but to my horror, I saw a fantastic vision, that of a flying saucer. I had never believed in these stories or visions, and the versions given about flying saucers had often provoked jokes from me. Terrified, but conscious, I tried to approach the craft. It was about 35 meters in diameter, that's 100 feet, rusty in color. It didn't touch the ground and had neither doors nor windows. The saucer appeared to be made of a single piece without any orifice. In absolute silence it lay there, seemingly part of nature. The only thing that seemed abnormal about it was the sensation of gentle warmth and the impression of suspended energy, such as one observed on a deserted road under the burning sun. Tense, I was expecting some monster to emerge from within, when suddenly the saucer moved a meter to the left without changing its distance from the ground in any way. My tension and nervousness were great. My body felt stiff. The moment I tried to move, the saucer rose slightly, and something imprecise appeared, a sort of appendage that quickly disappeared. So it was at this point that the encounter moved from a close encounter of the second kind to a close encounter of the third kind, because as Mr. C says, I saw a being appear in front of the saucer. It was not a monster, and it had emerged as if coming from thin air. Its height was about 1.5 meters, that's 4 feet 9 inches, and its way of looking and leaning was like that of humans. My attention was drawn to its transparent costume or suit, which covered it down to its feet, without any folds. It wore neither helmet nor shoes. The skin on its face was very white, and its hair was long. With its rather prominent jaw and flattened nose, it carried no instruments, and the arms of this strange creature seemed glued to its body. I would have liked to speak to it, but the fear of a possible attack held me back, as I was very afraid. Without anything lifting it, and without using a ladder or any other means, the being, which was below the machine, disappeared inside it. Shortly after, the craft seemed to inflate and emitted a strong purplish glow like the one it had upon its arrival. I rubbed my eyes to see better. The disk had become an incandescent red, but it emitted neither heat nor noise. It then began its vertical ascent at great speed. So still very frightened, the witness went home as quickly as he could. He decided not to tell anyone, as he feared that people might react badly. He returned to the site the next day to see if he could find any traces left by this craft or its occupant, but he found nothing unusual. The experience did leave him feeling ill for a few weeks, and it was this that prompted him to send a letter to the local newspaper describing his experience. That's another case where I would love to see a follow-up with the witness. I have lots of questions for him. Has this affected him for years afterwards? How does he feel about it? Has he had further encounters? What does he think about all of this? It's an amazing case. Now let's move to the next one. This one is so unusual. I can't say I've heard one quite like this. It does involve grays, but the behavior of the gray and the things it did are very unusual, if not unique. I call this case, he looked directly into my eyes. This occurred one evening in August 18, 1971 in Carmel Valley, California, in a pretty rural area. It's a really profound encounter with some aftermath that I have seen before, but the encounter itself is so unusual. The witness to this encounter has requested anonymity, so I call him Jonah. At the time of his encounter, he was camping just off Cachuga Road between Comsat Road and Trampa Canyon Road. You can see it here. This is 1 mile from the Jamesburg Earth Station. It was a moonlit night, August 18, 1971, and he was hiking back to his campsite when he saw a strange glow or orb of blue light that appeared to be crossing the bridge over the creek just about 100 feet from his campsite. Now, as it reached the center of the bridge, he could see that it was in fact a tall, slender figure, and it was carrying a plain white bag of some kind. This creature moved closer, and before Jonah knew it, it was looking straight at him. And as Jonah says, I drifted into a more calm state the closer he came. I was drawn into his mind. Then I remembered something. I may have gone somewhere because I have an image in my mind of turning off the bridge towards my campsite, and at that moment I saw a flash of his lower body and noticed that the suit he was wearing was a neutral bluish gray, but it had tiny sparklings all over the surface. I also noticed the belt at its waist. At first, I could see nothing but a dark silhouette with a lighter facial area. When I was coming out of my blank mind, I could see a little better, so some time could have passed. As he sat or kneeled next to me, I became aware of his hand on my chest. He stood up and turned and looked directly into my eyes, and I watched a yellow light or energy pull back into his eyes. In that instant, I clearly saw its eye area, and I looked through what seemed to be an eye covering. There were very large irises, which took up most of the area in what seemed to be light, large, angular eyes. It was 4 to 5 feet tall, a thin build, a large cranium with large angular eyes. After a short moment, he turned and walked away to the half log I was using as a table and lifted it up to put something under it. The being then walked away and Jonah fell asleep. Now Jonah doesn't remember much after this, and in fact, the last thing he consciously recalled at that time was just looking up into the being's eyes. So he did not remember this last part until about a year later, when he returned to the area to visit the site again. And as he did so, it was, as he says, as if, quote, a window opened in my mind and the scene became clear that something had been up under the table. So before he even stopped the car, he began running towards the site saying, there is something left by the being. As Jonah says, I ran up to the log and lifted it up to find the bag. Upon opening it, I pulled out the book, Learning Castilian Spanish. I wondered, why a language book? Now Jonah does not report reading this book or trying to learn the language, and says only that he eventually gave it to an artist friend who unfortunately lost it. But he does say that following his encounter, he experienced some profound psychic abilities. As Jonah says, I do not know of others who have had a close contact experience have reported any change in mental capacities. I have always had short glimpses into the future and a couple of paranormal experiences before my experience. Afterwards, I seem to have a strong sensitivity to others' thoughts. And in fact, Jonah provides a few examples of this, including picking up a phone before it rings, singing a song just before it appears on the radio. He started practicing Buddhism and meditation, and he found that he was very proficient in remote viewing and could visually see people in other rooms very clearly or sense someone staring at him. On one occasion, he felt his ex-girlfriend, who practiced Wicca, trying to cast some kind of spell on him. This was the impression he got. So he called her up, and she confessed that she and her friend had in fact cast a spell on him in an attempt to get him to join their, quote, coven. So he just told her, please don't do that again. He was definitely affected by his encounter, as he says. Indeed, something did change after the contact. I don't see time and space or life and death the same. We do see that pattern of people who have direct contact with extraterrestrials having a lot of paranormal and psychic experiences, both prior and after. And that pattern is definitely showing up in this case. And it's really interesting to me how the after effects of an encounter usually involve a person's psychic abilities increasing to a great degree, and of course changing their whole worldview on what is possible in this universe. But to me, the most fascinating aspect of that case is the fact that this ET dropped off a Spanish book for this gentleman. Such a shame he didn't learn Castilian Spanish. Maybe that would have led to something else going on. Hard to say. It's another case where I wish there was a follow-up on it, because I really wonder what's going on in that particular interaction. So now let's move to the next case. Fear is often a big issue in UFO encounters. We see it over and over again. There's quite a few accounts in this particular episode where people are very fearful just by the appearance of a UFO and humanoids. That's absolutely true in this case. I call this one, We Clung to One Another with Fear. This one occurred one evening in August 18, 1978, in a rural area of Harvey, Michigan. And this is an interesting case to me because it isn't a one-off. These two brothers had a very close encounter, and for some reason this UFO was showing a great interest in them. For what it's worth, this is my UFO story. This quote comes from the witness who, as a teenager, had a pretty scary encounter with a UFO that he will never forget. He's anonymous. I'll call him Thomas. That is a pseudonym. At the time of his encounter, Thomas, age 17, lived on his own in a cabin along the Chocolate River in Harvey, Michigan. This is not far from the headwaters where the river feeds into Lake Superior and just north of K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base. It was around 8 p.m. on August 18, 1978. Thomas was driving with his younger brother, age 12, along a country road about 2 miles from his cabin. And as Thomas says, coming around a corner that lined around a field, my brother and I saw this disc-shaped silver aircraft that hovered with no sound. Now, per Thomas, this craft had a flattish shape with a dome on top, and as he says, a window seemed to be the front top half to a fourth of the craft. It appeared that 2 human forms were in this window, with a panel in front of them, like a desk or a control board. I say human forms because they seem to have a round shape for a head, shoulder and arms, and a body trunk. I could not see faces, clothing, skin, nor hair, just the shape of a human form. 2, I believe, in this window of the craft. This craft was that close, just above the treetops. I'm not sure if it was adrenaline from fear, but my lips rolled on my teeth. Not a drop of saliva was in my mouth. I slowed for only moments, I'm sure, and drove away very fast, with my heart pounding. My brother and I never uttered a word. The duration of this sighting was no more than 3 to 5 minutes, so they continued the drive to the cabin, and Thomas immediately called K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base and reported the sighting to them. The officer who answered the phone told him that they had not seen anything on radar, but very interestingly, added that if the craft was truly just above the treetops, it would be invisible to radar. Now Thomas's brother was so frightened by the encounter, he refused to sleep on the couch in the one-room cabin as he normally would have, and insisted on sleeping with his brother. Now the windows in this cabin had curtains that were too short to cover the entire window. It was shortly after Thomas reported this sighting to Sawyer Base, and they had gone to bed, that a brilliant light shone in through the cabin window. And to their shock, the UFO had returned, and it was directly over their cabin. As Thomas says, "I swear, this craft hovered over my cabin. My little brother and I just clung to one another with fear. The light from this craft shone through the windows of the bedroom. I was used to B-52s flying over constantly, and never had this happen before or after this incident. From that day on, until about 4 years ago, I've had dreams, nightmares of UFOs in the sky there down by the Chocolate River. My brother and I didn't and don't speak of this incident. I'm now 42 years old, and he's 37. We both have families of our own and have not experienced something like this since. Something did happen. We could see human forms in a window-like windshield on this craft that hovered silently, and we couldn't explain it, and still can't. So, for what it's worth, this is my UFO story. Everyone doesn't have one. I do." Kudos to the witnesses for stepping forward and speaking about their encounters. As we know, the vast majority of witnesses don't talk about it, and these witnesses themselves rarely discuss it even with each other. This just goes to show how difficult it can be for some people to process a UFO encounter and how profoundly it affects them. So my heart goes out to all people who have these kinds of encounters and have difficulty dealing with them. It's one of the reasons I do this research. I think knowledge will dispel fear. And once we know what's going on, it's a lot easier to deal with. So now let's move to the next case. This one is truly astounding. I call this one, "It Returned 8 Times." This occurred throughout August and October of 1978 in Fuseta, Portugal. This case is so amazing. There are so many witnesses, landing traces, physiological effects, animal reactions. I mean, the whole deal. And so many accounts of this UFO returning again and again, in particular targeting this one family, or so it appears. So there's a lot to unpack with this case. I think it's an important one. There's a lot of evidence to this case. It involves multiple witnesses, electromagnetic disturbances, animal reactions, and physiological effects on the witnesses. It all began around 11:30 p.m. one evening in August 1978 when Maria Jose Martinez, age 41, stood in the courtyard of her home located on the outskirts of Fuseta, Portugal, not far from the fishermen's quarters. There's also a large mining area just a few kilometers away. Now suddenly, Maria saw a glowing red light hovering among a grove of almond trees about 50 meters from her home. She called out to her son Victor, age 17, to take a look, and he came outside, and as soon as he did, this light rose up from the ground and began to approach their house. They could now see that it was a circular craft about 2 meters wide with a small rectangular opening at the base. The red light was coming from this opening, and it was bright enough to illuminate the entire surrounding area. The surface of the craft, they said, was a metallic gray, and on the upper backside of the object they could see a triangular protrusion. Now when this object continued its approach, Maria and Victor became frightened. They turned off the light in their courtyard and hurried into the house, and to their shock, this object approached their house, coming to within 1 meter of it, illuminating the entire room. They watched as the rectangular opening slowly closed and the red luminosity of the object decreased, while the entire object became enveloped in a glowing white light. The dogs in the area started barking furiously, at which point the UFO returned back to its starting location among the almond grove, hovering about 10 meters high, and stayed there. Now during this time, the electric circuit breaker in the house was tripped at least 4 times. 3 other people in the neighborhood also saw the object. As Maria says, The light seemed to hypnotize us all. It was a kind of numbing effect. In fact, her son Victor became so frightened he actually wet himself. After an hour and a half, the UFO turned off its lights. Then it moved at high speed towards the railroad tracks, moving over them and out to the ocean, and was gone. That night they skipped dinner, and in fact her son Victor went straight to bed and fell asleep. Now over the next few days, Maria said she experienced, quote, pains all over her body. This forced her to go to the doctor and get medicine. Over the rest of the month, day after day, this object came back at least 8 more times, each time hovering directly over the Martinos' residence, usually at midnight and remaining to 1:30 a.m. One time it did arrive at 9:30 and left about midnight, so it usually stayed about an hour and a half or even longer. On one occasion, Miss Martinos' nephew arrived at the house by motorcycle at around 1 a.m., and this object zoomed towards him, emitting something resembling flames from its underside. This caused the young man to run screaming into the house. Now later, the family did learn that children in the area said that they saw this UFO land and some beings dressed in gray jumpsuits emerged, though investigators were not able to confirm this or get any more details. Events were still in progress, because it was at 10 p.m. on October 15, 1978, that another family, Antonio Villegas Mendonca, age 71 and a well-known local clairvoyant, and his wife, Leonor Diaz Martins Vasquez, were at their farm, which was next door to the residence of Maria Jose Martinos. So Antonio and his wife Leonor observed a brilliant red light coming through the windows of their home. They rushed outside, and to their amazement, only 5 meters from their house and right above the ground, bobbing slightly up and down, was apparently this same craft, which they described as a gray metallic circular object, spherical, pretty much identical to what the Martinos family had seen. They said it was 2 meters wide, it had the same rectangular opening at the base, which emitted an intense red light, which illuminated the area for about 50 meters around it. They said it was totally silent. When it appeared, the dogs in the area began barking. Now Antonio was deeply frightened by the appearance of this object, and he hid behind a wall. But his wife Leonor was more curious than afraid, and despite her husband's warnings, she approached this object to get a closer look. And peering inside through the opening, she saw something amazing. She described seeing 2 dark-colored armchairs, and standing in front of the chairs were 2 humanoid beings. She said they were 1.8 meters tall, that's 5 feet 9 inches, and they had strong, robust bodies, and each of them were wearing one-piece gray jumpsuits and gray helmets with 2 large round lenses where the eyes would be. She was about 1.5 meters away, at which point this object rose 5 meters upwards, 15 feet, and then moved 100 meters in a straight line, then zigzagged around 2 almond trees and continued off over the railroad tracks, which were located just 400 meters from the house, and it moved off towards the ocean. At that time, Leonor's brother in a different area also observed this object as it disappeared over the ocean and was gone. There's still a lot of questions about that particular case. Why was this UFO, these ETs, returning over and over again? I wonder if perhaps it's because there is a large mining complex near this area. Something is drawing these UFOs to this area. Could be the people themselves. It's very hard to say. Really unusual ETs as well, not your typical grays that we often hear about. Hard to say for sure because the witnesses didn't get a really good look at their actual appearance. But definitely a fascinating case on many levels. And here's another one that I found particularly poignant and profound. I call this one Father and Son Aliens. This is a single witness case relying pretty much solely on anecdotal testimony, but the witness does provide his first-hand account. I always love it when we can hear directly from the witness. This one occurred on the evening of August 6, 1980 in a very rural area of Mauston, Wisconsin. And it's just a fascinating account of a gentleman seeing a UFO and humanoids very close up. The witness in this case, Matthew, that is a pseudonym, was 21 years old. He had just quit his job as an industrial painter and moved back into his parents' home located on North 19th Avenue in Mauston, Wisconsin. You can see it here. This is a very rural area, and their house was particularly rural as it was nestled among the woods at the end of a very long curved driveway. It was around 11:30 p.m. on August 6, 1980, that Matthew arrived home. His parents had gone to sleep, but his mother greeted him, showed him some food that she had prepared for him, then went back to sleep. Matthew sat in the living room and was eating the food, and he could see a large picture window that faced their driveway. And as Matthew says, "I noticed what appeared to be a light shining at a downward angle at this bend in the driveway. My first reaction was that someone had inadvertently driven down our driveway and maybe went off the driveway trying to turn around at that bend. However, seconds later, everything that was white in the house, including my white shirt, began to fluoresce, just as it would under an ultraviolet blacklight. I stood up and walked closer to the window. In the distance, I could see a very tiny blue light pointing in my direction. The light then angled downward as if it was searching the ground. It appeared to be coming from above the tree line and also appeared to be coming closer." So it was clear to Matthew at this point that this was not a car, and curious, he stepped out the front door and stood on the east side of the house where he had a good view of the driveway. It was a dark, clear night with many stars, and this is when he saw something unusual. As Matthew says, "I stood there looking around and heard what I would describe as a combination of a buzz and a hum above the trees. I backed up to view the open sky area above the house. I then noticed something was blocking out the stars and was moving slow and steady. I was somewhat confused because this thing was big, like a large barn size, absolutely no lights of any kind, and too big not to make a louder noise. I could not make out much in the darkness. The front of this object appeared to be vertical and flat. The front had many black panels that sort of absorbed any light. The object was moving very slow, almost walking speed or slower. As the object moved overhead, I spotted a dull orange glow coming in my direction. It appeared to be small, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet, a window with orange interior lighting. 2 beings stood in the window. The window was just at their waist level and just above their heads. One large being stood and had its arms on the shoulder of the smaller being next to it. I could not make out details except that the heads appeared more round and the body shape was very skinny. I was stunned, frightened, and wanted to run inside to wake my parents, but all I could do was look up in disbelief and shock. I watched the craft or object pass over the house, and I saw all the stars again. The object went over the trees and towards the north and disappeared. However, I could still hear the sound of a soft hum for quite some time. Now Matthew says that these 2 figures were definitely looking down at him, and as he says, "I also had the feeling that the beings looking down at me were father and son, and that they were just exploring." The next morning he tried to tell his parents about his amazing encounter, but they were not receptive and told him that he must have been overly tired and seeing things. So as Matthew says, "After that, I never really spoke about the incident. This sighting happened many years ago, but I finally want to tell this story before I get too old." It's clearly a burden for many people who have this kind of experience and find themselves unable to share it with their closest family. Such a shame. I think the UFO cover-up has really pulled a number on all humanity. People actually believe that these cases can be explained away as hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, or mental illness, and then when they have their own encounter, it's such an incredible shock. Obviously, those explanations don't hold water. There's far too much evidence. There's far too many cases to explain them away that way. I'm absolutely convinced, obviously, that we are being visited by extraterrestrials, and I think the cases themselves speak very clearly towards this. And you can be skeptical of one case or 10 or 20 or 100, but there's literally thousands upon thousands of humanoid cases and really good evidence that they number in the millions. So that alone, I think, is a good reason to take these accounts seriously. And here's another one. This case was really interesting to me because, again, we see people reacting very emotionally, but on opposite ends of the bell curve. Some people being absolutely overjoyed and excited, while others reacting with extreme fear. I call this next case something almost divine. This occurred one evening in August 1993 in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. This is a multiple witness case, quite a few witnesses. A really fascinating encounter. I call the witness in this case Carol. That is a pseudonym. She was only 6 or 7 years old when she and her family and friends had an encounter that would convince her forever of the reality of UFOs and extraterrestrials. It was a warm summer evening in late August 1993, around 10:15 p.m., as Carol, her mother, and a group of about 10 people were in the backyard of their family home in the small town of St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. They had a bonfire going, and Carol and 4 other kids were running around their forested backyard playing flashlight tag. Carol had just been tagged again, and feeling sullen about it, decided to stop playing and instead go roast a marshmallow, and this is when the UFO showed up. Carol apparently was the first to see it. As she says, "I was the first to spot it come down and suddenly be right over the top of where our gazebo and bonfire were. It was a hexagon-shaped craft, maybe 40 feet wide by 15 feet, maybe a bit larger, with a green light at each of the hexagon-shaped points and a red light on top of a pointed dome. It came silently out of nowhere from the northern direction of the sky. It was a giant, completely silent craft hovering above us. It was about 100 feet from us. I pointed at it and said something like, 'Look, a UFO!' Then everyone else saw it too. The adults came out from under the gazebo, and we all stared at this object for many minutes. Now, to Carol's amazement, several of the people there reacted with fear. After just a few moments of watching the craft hover overhead, they became scared, dashed to their cars, and drove away. A few of the kids who lived next door went straight home, but Carol's reaction was different. As she says, "I didn't feel like missing a moment of the scene in the sky. I stood there with 2 other kids who stayed, a brother and sister who lived down the street. My mother stayed as well. Within about 10 minutes of the craft being there, it ended up being just the 4 of us. My mother didn't seem very surprised or concerned." Now, in fact, her mother nonchalantly said, "Yeah, that's a UFO. Don't worry, they aren't going to hurt us. They're just curious." Now, Carol was more amazed and astounded than anything, though she became aware that the 8-year-old neighbor boy started crying and screaming in fear. She didn't pay attention as she was riveted to the UFO, especially because of what she now saw through the windows of the craft. As Carol says, "I couldn't take my eyes off the craft. I kept my eyes glued on it, taking in every detail I could. I didn't want to look away even for a millisecond. As it silently hovered over us, it would tilt a bit to the side, showing its windows on the upper side of the hexagon-shaped dome, 1 window for each side. The windows were a yellow-white light. I could see a faint silhouette of one being's head looking down at us. I could definitely see something head-shaped looking out the window at us." Now, by this point, the neighbor boy was hysterical with fear. He was having a full-blown panic attack and was screaming over and over, "We're all going to die." His sister vainly tried to explain to him that they were, quote, "nice aliens, like the Coneheads," she told him. But the boy was having such a hard time that Carol's mother decided to drive him home. Carol didn't want to leave, but the boy refused to walk the short distance to his home, which was just down the street. And as if sensing that the witnesses were about to leave, the craft zipped up into the sky and headed to the east over the woods. So Carol, her mother, and the 2 neighbor kids piled into the car, and as they drove off, Carol saw a group of about 15 people standing in the parking lot of the gym next door to their home, staring up into the sky where this craft had just been. They drove the boy home, and Carol's mother had to explain to the boy's mother why he was crying and hysterical with fear. Returning home, Carol searched for the craft, which was of course now gone. She fearfully worried about their 3 outdoor cats. Her mother said, "Don't worry, they're fine." Later that night, afraid that the ETs might come back, she began locking all the doors. But again, her mother acted nonchalantly and told her not to worry, that the aliens were, quote, "just curious and wouldn't hurt us." The next day, Carol tried to visit the 2 neighborhood kids, but their mother refused to let her see them and said, quote, "Never ever mention anything about that night to my children again." And she explained that her son had stayed up all night crying. Now, although they had been good friends, that encounter ended the friendship, and Carol never spoke to them again. Carol, however, was amazed by this sighting, and in fact she drew pictures of it. She was glad to have seen the UFO and the ET inside it. And as Carol says, "It felt like everyone just wanted to forget it happened, except my mom, who just acted like it wasn't really weird to her at all. I will never forget the event, and I felt at peace and blessed by the sighting. I felt I had the opportunity to learn a mystery of the universe. I felt I experienced something almost divine. I've known since then that there really are alien spacecraft that come and observe us." Carol would later have a few other sightings and weird experiences, but none ever compared to this childhood sighting. And as she says, "Looking back at how my mother responded and to this unique talent she was born with that led her to be a very talented professional artist, I wonder if they were interested in her. And I wonder if my first experience had not been her first experience. She seemed so calm and relaxed the entire time. I found that I had the sense of peace and serenity when I had my other odd experience as an adult. I can't explain how my mother and I knew that they were only curious and meant us no harm, but I was sure they meant me no harm. I can't explain why I felt that serenity, but I felt such peace that I'm not sure the feeling fully came from within me. I have only felt that level of serenity in nature and when that craft was present." How amazing is that? I mean, you have so many witnesses. I really wonder if the mother did have other encounters, because the way she was reacting so nonchalantly certainly speaks towards the possibility that this was something she had experienced before in her life. It's truly a fascinating case and shows how difficult it is for people to process an encounter like this. And once again, we see it wasn't a one-off. I suspect that that was your typical UFO display where ETs come down and basically announce their presence with the intention of just letting people know that we're here, that UFOs are real, that we're not alone. Hard to say for sure, but there's quite a few cases that fit that pattern. Now let's move to the next case, which again is very unusual. I call this one Something Vaguely Human. This does appear to involve a gray ET, but its behavior is really odd. This occurred one evening in June 2001 in Ballard County, Kentucky, and like many encounters, this one occurred while 2 people were driving late at night in a remote area. This case comes from researcher Nathaniel Brislin, who published it in his book Crawlers, a Conclusive Casebook. It's a pretty brief case, but it's quite unusual. It involves 2 witnesses. One is Kimberly Ashley, and the other is her friend, who uses the pseudonym Blake. It was one evening around 2 a.m. in June 2001 that Kimberly and Blake were driving along the back roads of Ballard County, located in western Kentucky. Kimberly was driving, and Blake was in the front passenger seat. They had just turned onto a gravel farm road. There was a large field with a tree line about a mile away, and this is when Kimberly noticed something very unusual. As Kimberly says, "I caught sight of something white and vaguely human crawling in the ditch. As we passed, I hit the brakes, thinking it was a person who needed help." Now Blake also saw this creature, and when Kimberly hit the brakes, he completely freaked out and shouted at her, Are you crazy? Don't effing stop. As Kimberly says, I looked in the mirror and I saw that it was standing up. Even though it was still in the ditch, it was as tall as the stop sign next to it. It took a step towards us and I hit the gas. As we drove away, I saw in the mirror that it had dropped to all fours and was crawling after us. It crawled like a lizard down the road after us. No matter how close I was to it, I never got a good look at it. It was fuzzy, like it was constantly out of focus. When it crawled, it moved like a lizard, hands and feet on the ground, elbows and knees up and out, wiggling side to side. I'm not sure why, but something about it makes me think of it as male, maybe the height. I didn't start pulling away from it until I got up to about 40 miles per hour. How about that? Amazing, right? And here we have one witness who's ready to stop and take a closer look, is interested and curious, and the other witness is absolutely freaking out, totally scared, and just wants to get out of the area. This is again showing how fear plays such a powerful role in many people's UFO encounters. Hoping we can overcome fear. Overcoming fear has so many benefits in every area of a person's life. Again, knowledge is power. Knowledge dispels fear. It's really important. We learn what's going on here so we can move past the fear surrounding the subject. I honestly don't think it's warranted. Okay, let's move to the last and final case in this episode. This one is also super interesting. In some ways it's typical, in some ways not. We do see the pattern here of people seeing a UFO, and this is followed up by a much closer encounter. I call this one, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This occurred on June 15, 2022 in Albemarle, North Carolina. And this is a really amazing case where a young couple had an extraordinary UFO encounter, followed up by a really close-up humanoid sighting. There are two witnesses to this case, Jeff and Maria. Those are pseudonyms. They were boyfriend and girlfriend and lived in a home in Albemarle, North Carolina when they had their encounter with a UFO and then a humanoid. The encounter began with a sighting. Jeff went outside to have a smoke and walk the dog. It was around 10 a.m. on June 15, 2022. As Jeff says, I went out to have a smoke and walk the dog when I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and I watched it get closer. I knew it didn't look right. It was flying just above the trees about a mile away, slowly getting closer. When it got close enough to comprehend what I was looking at, I realized it was not anything I could recognize. Not a plane. It was rectangular in shape, but it had an odd shape, like a big chunk of mangled metal, half cloaked with orange-yellow light along the bottom side of it. It looked like it was trying to half cloak itself, but it wasn't, and it moved slowly over my head. So realizing he was seeing something he could not identify, a UFO, he shouted out to his girlfriend, "Come look!" And as Jeff says, I wasn't even thinking about taking a video or yelling from my phone because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And she came out and watched it with me as it was just coming over our heads. It slowly moved across the sky and slowly ascended into a cloud. We both waited to see if it would come out of the cloud, but it never did. So both Jeff and Maria were amazed. Little did they know the most amazing part was yet to come. As Jeff says, the next evening, my girlfriend was walking the dog. There was a big fig tree in the middle of the yard, and she saw a small being looking around the tree or bush. It was a grayish-green color with big black eyes and long, skinny arms. The dog started to freak out, so she grabbed her and ran into the house, put a blanket over the kitchen window in case it was looking at us. She ran upstairs and told me. We were uneasy for a long time until we finally fell asleep. So the coincidence of seeing a UFO and then an alien being one day later was not lost on them. As Jeff says, the entity sighting was a day after the UFO sighting. I don't know if what we saw was alien or some kind of government-involved craft, but I believe my girlfriend when she says she saw something hiding behind the bush. All I know is I've never experienced anything like that so close up. I've had UFO sightings in the past and after, but nothing like that, right in my face. I so wish I would have thought to tell my girlfriend to grab my phone, but I wasn't thinking about that. It was just so unexpected and dumbfounding that I didn't think about it. I just want to get my story out there so that we may be able to figure out what's going on with all of this. Another amazing case. It's funny because so many people who have these encounters never even think about taking a photograph. It's usually the last thing that's on a person's mind. They are just so flabbergasted by what they're seeing that they don't even think about taking a picture, which is such a shame because we could really have a lot more photographic evidence. Thankfully, the photographic evidence on this subject is mountainous. A lot of it currently is littered with fakery, AI, Photoshop, and things which make it very difficult to find the actual genuine photographs. But the evidence for this subject is absolutely overwhelming. It's not just eyewitness testimony by any means. There's photographs and films and landing traces. There's animal reactions. There's electromagnetic disturbances, physiological effects, radar. I mean, we're seeing a lot of evidence in just this episode alone, which just goes to speak of how much evidence there truly is, because these 10 cases represent just the minutest fraction of the actual number of UFO accounts. So there you go, 10 cases from all over the world, reaching back to the 1950s all the way up to the 2020s, showing again how ubiquitous this subject is, taking place pretty much all over this planet. So thank you guys for watching. I truly appreciate it. I hope you found this episode interesting and perhaps learned something about the extraterrestrial presence on our planet. I truly appreciate you guys watching, so thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. It's up to you to find it. And most important of all, keep having fun, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.